On a cold morning in Portland, Maine, 6 stray dogs found Harold Matthews lying unconscious by the road. Harold, a 93-year-old veteran, had collapsed during his morning walk. But these weren't ordinary strays. They formed a circle around him and began a strange ritual no one had ever seen before. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light as they moved around his body, each taking precise positions like soldiers on a mission. When Harold opened his eyes, he saw something impossible. These dogs weren't just trying to help him. They were showing him memories he'd forgotten from his time in Vietnam, memories that had been locked away for 50 years. As Harold watched them, ancient symbols appeared in his mind, and a forgotten promise emerged from the depths of his past. Could these mysterious dogs be the key to unlocking the secret mission Harold failed to complete half a century ago? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Earlier that morning, before the dogs found him, Harold Matthews had followed the same routine he'd maintained for the past 47 years. Up at 5:30 a.m. sharp, coffee brewing by 5:35, and the familiar weight of his old dog tags against his chest as he dressed in his walking clothes. The tags weren't regulation anymore. They'd grown smooth with age, the embossed letters worn down by decades of worrying fingers. His small kitchen felt emptier now without Marie's humming. 6 months since she'd passed, but the silence still caught him off guard. He poured his coffee into the chipped Marine Corps mug she'd given him back in '69, the one she'd said would keep him safe. The morning light caught something on the shelf above the sink. A photograph he thought he'd packed away years ago. Harold's arthritic fingers trembled as he reached for it. The edges were yellow and curling, but the image remained clear. 20 young men in jungle fatigues, standing proud before a temple whose ancient stones seemed to glow in the Vietnamese sun. At the center, a younger version of himself stood, next to a local man wearing elaborate robes and a pendant that seemed to catch the light oddly, even in the faded photograph. "Found this while cleaning yesterday," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah, his daughter, stood there in her nurse's scrubs, dark circles under her eyes from another night shift. "Who's the man in the robes?" Harold set his coffee down, a tremor running through his hand. I don't remember." The words felt wrong in his mouth. How could he not remember? The man's face was so clear, so important-looking. Yet when he tried to recall the moment the photo was taken, there was nothing but a strange buzzing in his head. Sarah sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment he'd grown used to since Marie's passing. "Dad, Dr. Peterson said these walks aren't safe anymore. Not at your age, not alone. Been walking this route since before you were born, girl." Harold's voice carried the gruff authority of a former master sergeant, though time had softened its edges. "Don't need anyone holding my hand. Mom would want you to be careful." Sarah stepped into the kitchen, her movements careful, measured. "Ever since her funeral, you've been different, distant, like you're looking for something." Harold's eyes drifted back to the photograph. The robed man's pendant seemed to shimmer, drawing his gaze. A memory flickered, incense smoke, chanting, a circle of something important, but it slipped away like mist. "Just need my exercise," he muttered, tucking the photograph into his jacket pocket. "Keeps the old joints moving." Sarah moved to protest, but Harold was already heading for the door, his walking stick tapping against the hardwood floors. The morning air hit him with its familiar October bite as he stepped outside, dead leaves crunching under his feet. His route took him past the Veterans Memorial Park, where granite slabs bore the names of those lost in conflicts across the decades. Harold usually paused here, paying his respects, but today something pulled him onward. The photograph seemed to burn in his pocket, and with each step, fragments of memory flickered like an old film reel. Jungle heat, whispered conversations, a promise made in firelight. The sky darkened suddenly, though it had been clear moments before. Harold's chest tightened, not the usual arthritis, but something else. The world tilted sideways as his legs gave way. As consciousness faded, he thought he heard something impossible. The sound of military cadence called out in barks and growls. Sarah would find the photograph later, after the ambulance had come and gone. She'd noticed something, she was sure. Hadn't been there before. On the back, in faded ink, words that made no sense. The Guardians remember. The circle must be completed. The hospital room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Harold's consciousness flickered back. The antiseptic smell brought sudden, sharp memories. Field hospitals in Vietnam, the metallic scent of blood mixing with jungle rot. But there was another smell now, something wild and ancient that didn't belong among the sterile sheets and beeping monitors. "Welcome back, Mr. Matthews," said a young doctor, checking vital signs. "You gave your daughter quite a scare. Do you remember what happened?" Before Harold could answer, movement caught his eye. Through the third-floor window, a German shepherd sat on an impossible ledge, its amber eyes fixed on him with unsettling intelligence. Behind it, 5 more dogs appeared, perfectly balanced on the narrow concrete strip. There were dogs. Harold managed his throat dry. The doctor nodded sympathetically. The EMTs mentioned that. Quite unusual behavior for strays. They formed some sort of circle around you. Wouldn't let anyone near until the ambulance arrived. Animal control still trying to locate them. A glint of light drew Harold's attention to the bedside table. There, partially wrapped in his folded clothes, was something that made his heart stop. A stone pendant, identical to the one worn by the robed man in the photograph. The surface was carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Where did that come from?" Harold asked, reaching for it with trembling fingers. The doctor frowned. "The pendant. It was around your neck when they brought you in. We assumed it was yours, but Harold had never seen it before. Or had he? As his fingers touched the cool stone, images flooded his mind. Midnight ceremonies in a jungle clearing, ancient words spoken in firelight, and dogs, always dogs, moving in precise patterns that spoke of purpose and power. Sarah burst into the room, clutching the photograph. "Dad, the writing on the back, it's changed again." The doctor excused himself, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension in the room. As the door closed behind him, the dogs outside began to move, tracing the same pattern Harold had seen in his restored memory. The pendant grew warm in his hand. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered, watching the impossible scene outside the window. "I made a promise," Harold said, the words coming from somewhere deep and forgotten. "We all did. The 16 of us and others. The temple guardians. But something went wrong. The circle was broken. The largest dog, the German shepherd, locked eyes with Harold. In its gaze, he saw the face of a young soldier, Jimmy Chen, who'd been their unit's radio operator, who died taking point on a mission that wasn't in any official record. Sarah gripped his hand. "Dad, you're scaring me. What circle? What promise?" The pendant pulsed once, and Harold saw it all. The secret mission to an ancient temple, the local priests who'd warned of an awakening evil, the ritual that 16 young soldiers had sworn to complete. They'd thought the old man's talk of temple guardians and spiritual warfare was just local superstition, until the night everything went sideways and half the unit vanished without a trace. "The dogs," Harold said, his voice stronger now. "They're not just dogs. They're the guardians. The ones who were supposed to guide us back. We weren't ready then, couldn't understand. But they've been waiting for us to be ready to complete what we started." Outside, the dogs continued. Their silent ritual, their movements matching the shifting symbols on the pendant. Harold felt strength flowing back into his aged limbs. Not the vigor of youth, but something different, something ancient and purposeful. Sarah stared at the photograph again. The robed man's face had changed, becoming clearer, more familiar. "This is impossible," she whispered. "No," Harold said, sitting up straighter. "It's necessary. The circle has to be completed, and they've chosen me to finish it." A nurse rushed in, alarmed by his movement, but stopped short at the sight of the dogs outside. As she backed away, Harold caught his reflection in the window. His eyes had taken on the same amber glow as the guardians outside. The time for denying. The impossible was over. The mission he'd forgotten was about to begin again, this time with supernatural allies 50 years in the waiting. Thomas Riley's hands shook as he pulled the old ammo box from beneath his bed. At 89, he was the youngest survivor of their unit, but his mind was still razor-sharp. The call from Harold had brought everything rushing back. The temple, the ritual, the men they'd lost. "Thought I'd take these secrets to my grave," Thomas said, as Harold and Sarah settled into his small living room. The German shepherd, the one Harold now knew carried Jimmy Chen's spirit, sat alertly by the door. "Never thought they'd come looking for us." From the box, he withdrew a leather-bound journal, its edges charred and pages warped with water. Damage. Kept a record of everything. "The brass ordered us to burn all evidence, but I couldn't. Not after what we saw." Harold reached for the journal, the pendant warm against his chest. As his fingers touched the leather, both the pendant and the journal began to glow, with a faint, pulsing light. "My God," Thomas whispered. "It's true then. They've really come back for us." Sarah watched in stunned silence as her father opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, military precise, but the words themselves seemed to shift between English and something more ancient. "February 12th, 1969, Harold read aloud. "Local priest warns of darkness stirring beneath the temple. Chen thinks it's VC propaganda, but Captain isn't so sure. The dogs in the village have been acting strange, moving in formations, standing guard at night, like they know something's coming." Thomas nodded grimly. "Keep reading. It gets stranger." "February 15th, found the temple entrance. Ancient writing everywhere. The priest, Than, says we've been chosen. Says the temple guardians have been waiting for warriors worthy of their trust. Called us the New Circle. Most of the guys think it's superstitious nonsense, but those dogs..." Harold's voice trailed off as memories surfaced. The way local strays would appear during patrol, leading them away from ambushes. How they'd form protective circles during rest stops. The night 16 dogs approached their camp, each choosing a specific soldier. "The ritual was supposed to seal something away," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something old, something that had been sleeping until the war woke it up. But it went wrong. Or maybe we weren't ready. Half the unit vanished. Not killed, not captured. Just gone, along with their dogs." Sarah picked up a loose page that had fallen from the journal. "There's a map here. These symbols, they're the same ones the dogs were making outside the hospital." "Positions of power," Harold murmured. "Knowledge flowing from somewhere beyond. Memory. The guardians are showing us the way to complete the circle, to finish what we started." The German shepherd, Jimmy, stood suddenly, hackles raised. Outside they heard the sound of car doors slamming. "You weren't the only one keeping records," Thomas said, moving to the window. "Black SUVs, government plates. They've been watching all these years, waiting to see if what we started would ever come back to haunt them." Harold stuffed the journal into his jacket as footsteps approached the door. The pendant burned against his skin, and Jimmy moved to stand between them and the entrance, his form seeming to shimmer between dog and soldier. "Back door," Thomas said, grabbing his cane. "Like old times, eh? They can't stop it now. The circle's already starting to reform." As they slipped out through the kitchen, Harold caught a glimpse of the other 5 dogs, taking up defensive positions around the house. 50 years ago, they'd been young men playing at ancient rituals. Now they were old men, guided by ancient powers. And somewhere in the jungle, half a world away, a darkness was stirring, waiting to see if they would finally finish what they'd begun. Sarah's apartment became their impromptu command center, maps and documents spread across her dining room table. The dogs had led them there, avoiding main roads and security cameras with tactical precision that no ordinary strays could possess. Now all 6 of them maintained a perimeter around the building, their movements so coordinated it seemed like a military operation. "Look at this," Sarah said, overlaying a tracing of the dog's hospital ritual onto Thomas's old map of Vietnam. The patterns aligned perfectly with a series of temples marked in faded red ink. They're not just moving randomly, they're recreating sacred sites. Harold traced the lines with a weathered finger, the pendant pulsing in time with his heartbeat. These temples, they formed a protective circle, a barrier against something ancient, something that was never supposed to wake up. Thomas shuffled through the journal's water-damaged pages. Here, March 1st, 1969. Than says the temples are pressure points, strategic locations where the barrier between worlds is thinnest. The Guardians maintained the seals for centuries. But the war, the bombing, Harold finished, another memory surfacing. All those B-52 strikes. We didn't just damage the land, we weakened the barriers. A sharp bark from outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as Jimmy and the others began moving in a new formation. Sarah quickly sketched it, her nurse's hands steady despite her fear. "Dad, look." She laid the sketch over another map. "It matches the positions of your unit the night everything went wrong." The pendant flared, and suddenly Harold could see it clearly. 16 men. In a circle around the temple entrance, dogs at their sides, ancient words on their lips. The ground trembling not from artillery, but from something stirring deep below. "We thought we were just humoring the locals," Thomas said softly. "Thought the ritual was about blessing the troops or some such nonsense. But we were wrong. We were being recruited. The Guardians needed new anchors, new defenders. The old ones were dying out, and what they held back was getting stronger." Sarah's phone buzzed. A news alert. Her face paled as she read. "There's been an earthquake. In Vietnam, near Da Nang, they're reporting strange phenomena. Lights in the sky, unusual animal behavior." "It's starting again," Harold said, standing straighter despite his age. "Whatever we trapped back then, it's breaking free. That's why they've come back for us. We're the only ones left who can finish the ritual." The dogs outside shifted formation again, and this time Harold recognized it. Battle positions, defending against an unseen enemy. A black SUV cruised slowly past the apartment, government plates visible. "They'll try to stop us," Thomas warned. "The military, the CIA, they've spent 50 years burying what happened. Can't have a bunch of old vets talking about supernatural temples and dog spirits. Bad for morale." Sarah gathered the maps with surprising efficiency. "Then we'd better move fast. I've got some vacation days saved up and a friend who works at the airport. If those dogs really are the guardians of some ancient power, they chose you for a reason. Both of you." Harold touched the pendant, feeling its warmth spread through his tired bones. In his mind, he saw Jimmy Chen's face again, young, determined, unafraid. Then he looked at the German shepherd watching him through the window, saw the same courage in those amber eyes. "We'll need supplies," he said. "Military training kicking in. Can't fight a supernatural war without proper gear." "And answers," Thomas added. "There's an expert in Vietnamese folklore at the university, Professor Lin. She might be able to help us understand what we're really dealing with." The dogs barked in unison, 6 sharp reports like rifle fire. A warning, the SUV was coming around again. "Time to move," Harold said, gathering the journal. "Sarah, you don't have to—" "Don't even start, Dad," she cut him off. "Mum always said you were hopeless without backup. Besides, someone needs to keep you 2 old soldiers from overdoing it." Outside, the dogs formed up, ready to move. 50 years ago, Harold had made a promise in a language he didn't understand, to powers he didn't believe in. Now, those powers had returned, offering one last chance to make things right. The pendant pulsed again, stronger this time. Somewhere in Vietnam, an ancient evil was awakening. But this time, they would be ready. This time, the circle would be completed. Professor Lin's office was a maze of artifacts and books, the air heavy with incense and history. The elderly scholar adjusted her glasses as she examined the pendant, her eyes widening at the shifting symbols. "In 40 years of studying Vietnamese," Mysticism. I've only seen this script in ancient texts, she said, carefully turning the stone. Where did you find this? It found us, Harold replied, watching Jimmy maintain his guard position by the door. The other dogs had spread out across campus, monitoring different approaches to the building. The professor's eyes darted between Harold and the German shepherd. Interesting. Your guardian seems familiar with protocol. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. The professor's choice of words was too specific to be coincidence. You know about the guardians, Harold said. It wasn't a question. Professor Lynn moved to a locked cabinet, her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved an aged scroll case. My grandmother was a keeper of records at the Temple of the Five Winds. She spoke of warrior spirits who took the form of dogs, protecting sacred sites from ancient threats. She carefully unrolled the scroll on her desk. The yellowed silk was covered in elaborate illustrations, circles of dogs transforming into warriors, temples glowing with mystical energy, and dark shapes lurking beneath the earth. The scroll speaks of a time when the old barriers would weaken, she continued, translating the faded text. When the guardians would seek new allies among foreign warriors, those whose hearts were pure enough to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. Harold's pendant began to glow in response to the scroll, casting strange shadows on the office walls. In those shadows, they could see the ghostly outlines of soldiers standing where the dogs sat, the 16 chosen ones. Professor Lynn read, her finger tracing the ancient characters, bound by sacred oath to maintain the seals. But the text speaks of a warning. The circle must be complete. All 16 must be present when the final ritual is performed, or the seals will fail entirely. But half our unit vanished, Thomas protested. How can we complete the circle without them? The professor's expression grew grave. They didn't vanish, Mr. Riley. They transformed. The Guardians didn't just choose your unit, they merged with those who were ready. The dogs you see now, they're your missing comrades, their spirits preserved by ancient magic until the circle could be completed. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk. You're saying these dogs are actually the missing soldiers? Yes, Professor Lynn gestured to Jimmy. Their bodies may have changed, but their essence, their purpose, remained intact. They've waited 50 years for the others to be ready for the truth. A low growl from Jimmy interrupted them. Through the window, they saw another black SUV circling the parking lot. They're getting closer, Thomas muttered. We're running out of time. Professor Lynn quickly rolled up the scroll, pressing it into Harold's hands. Take it. The full ritual is described here, along with the locations of the remaining seals. But be warned, the government isn't your only enemy. There are others who serve the darkness, who want the barriers to fall. Why us? Harold asked even. As new memories surfaced, the weight of ancient words, the feel of power flowing through a circle of brothers in arms. Why did they choose soldiers? Because soldiers understand sacrifice, the professor said softly. They understand that some battles must be fought in secret. That victory sometimes requires paying the ultimate price. The Guardians chose you because you already knew what it meant to give everything for a greater cause. The pendant flared again, and this time Harold saw more than memories. He saw what would happen if they failed. Ancient horrors breaking free. The barriers between worlds crumbling, humanity facing threats it had forgotten how to fight. Jimmy barked sharply, 2 short, 1 long, military code for immediate danger. Back exit, Professor Lynn said, already moving. Through the archaeology department. I'll delay them as long as I can. As they slipped out into the corridor, Harold clutched the scroll and pendant close. With each step, he felt the weight of their mission growing. It wasn't just about completing a forgotten ritual anymore. It was about honoring the sacrifice his lost comrades had made, about finishing what they'd started half a century ago. The dogs formed up around them, moving with deadly precision through the maze of academic hallways. In the distance, they could hear voices, radios crackling with official-sounding chatter. But Harold wasn't afraid anymore. They had the scroll, they had the guardians, and most importantly, they finally had the truth. Now they just had to figure out how to use it. They found temporary shelter in an abandoned VFW hall on the outskirts of town. The irony wasn't lost on Harold, seeking refuge in a place meant to honor veterans while running from their own government. The dogs had led them here through a series of back alleys and forgotten paths, avoiding every traffic camera and patrol car along the way. "Look at this," Sarah said, shining her flashlight on a dusty display case. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a collection of items from their exact unit. What are the chances? Harold's pendant pulsed as he approached the case. Behind the glass, a set of dog tags caught the light. 8 pairs, belonging to the soldiers who had vanished that night in Vietnam. As they watched, shadows began to gather around the building, taking canine forms. "More coming," Thomas whispered, peering through the grimy windows. "Big ones." They emerged from the darkness, one by one. A massive Rottweiler, a Belgian Malinois, a scarred Doberman, and others, each moving with military precision, each wearing eyes that held human intelligence. The original 6 guardians greeted them with quiet whines of recognition. Sarah's hands shook as she counted. 14 now. We're only missing 2. Harold felt memories stirring as each new dog appeared. The Rottweiler, that was Martinez, their demolitions expert. The Malinois had Sergeant Peterson's steady gaze. Each one triggered flashes of the men they'd been, the brothers they'd lost. The case's lock clicked open on its own, the pendant's glow intensifying. As Harold reached for the dog tags, each one began to resonate with a subtle hum. The dogs moved into formation, creating a perfect circle around them. "It's a key," Thomas realized, watching the tags vibrate in harmony with the pendant. The tags, the pendant, the scroll, they're all parts of the same lock. Sarah unrolled the scroll carefully on a dusty table. "Look, the ritual requires 16 anchors, each connected to both worlds. The soldiers and their guardian spirits linked through these tokens of service. The Doberman, who Harold now remembered as Cooper, their best scout, approached with something in its mouth, a weathered map case. Inside, they found military coordinates overlaid with spiritual ley lines, showing how the temple sites aligned with modern positions. "They've been gathering intelligence all these years," Harold said with growing understanding. "Walking the lines, monitoring the barriers, waiting for us to be ready." Suddenly, all 14 dogs tensed. Through the windows, they saw more black SUVs approaching, forming a perimeter around the building. "How did they find us?" Sarah whispered. "They didn't," Thomas said grimly. "They found them." He pointed to the newly arrived guardians. "They've been tracking the others, waiting for them to gather." A voice boomed through a megaphone outside. "Harold Matthews, Thomas Riley, we know you're in there. Come out now. This is a matter of national security." The dogs moved into defensive positions, their forms shimming between animal and human shadows. Harold felt the weight of the dog tags in his hands, each one pulsing with the same rhythm as his pendant. "National security," he muttered. "If they only knew what we were really protecting them from." The scroll's text seemed to shift, revealing new passages. Sarah leaned in, translating quickly. "It says the Guardians can create a pathway, a hidden road between the sacred sites. But it requires blood sacrifice." "No," Harold said, understanding flowing through him. "Not blood. Tags. These aren't just identification, they're contracts. Promises we made to serve and protect. The ultimate pledge of service." As if in response, the tags began to glow brighter. The dogs' eyes reflected the light, their forms becoming more fluid, more ethereal. Outside, they could hear boots on gravel, weapons being readied. "We need to move," Thomas urged. "Whatever we're going to do with these tags, it needs to happen now." Harold looked at the 14 guardians, seeing in each one the face of a friend long lost. Somewhere out there, 2 more were waiting. The circle was almost complete. He raised the tags, feeling decades of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood flowing through the metal. Time to cash in those promises, boys. The tags flared like miniature suns, and the world began to change around them. The world shifted and reformed around them like smoke in a wind, the VFW hall dissolving into a different kind of sanctuary. They found themselves standing in a clearing in the Maine woods, surrounded by ancient stone markers half buried in moss. The 14 guardian dogs moved outward in a precise pattern, their paws leaving glowing prints in the earth. "I know this place," Thomas breathed, leaning heavily on his cane. "We did training exercises here back in '68 before shipping out. Always felt different." Sarah pulled a stone rubbing from her bag, one she'd made from the temple walls. "In Professor Lin's collection, the patterns match the worn carvings on the markers perfectly. They're the same," she said. "This was a sacred site, long before it was a military training ground. The army built their bases on PowerPoints without even knowing it." A twig snapped in the darkness. The dogs turned as one, alert but not aggressive. From the shadows emerged 3 elderly men, each walking with the unmistakable bearing of career soldiers. "Saw the signs?" said the first man, introducing himself, as Colonel James Walker retired. "Dogs acting strange all up and down the coast, ancient writing appearing on our old tags. Figured something was finally happening." The second man, former Master Sergeant Mike Reeves, pointed to Harold's pendant. "Got one of those too. Started glowing about a week ago." He pulled out a similar stone, its symbols pulsing in sync with Harold's. The third veteran, Chief William Yellowfeather, smiled knowingly. "My grandfather was a medicine man. He used to say some wars never end. They just wait for the right warriors to come along." The 14 guardians arranged themselves in a ceremonial pattern that Harold now recognized from the scroll. The ground beneath their paws began to illuminate, revealing a vast geometric design hidden beneath years of soil and leaves. "The temple rubbing," Sarah said, spreading it out on a flat stone. "It's not just showing us the pattern. It's a manual. Look at these figures around the edge." The aged paper showed human and canine forms moving through complex formations, each stance channeling energy through the sacred geometry beneath them. As they studied it, the dogs began to mirror, the positions, their forms flickering between animal and human. "We're not the only ones they called," Colonel Walker said, watching the display with military assessment. "There are other sites, other veterans. The Guardians have been recruiting for generations, building a defensive line piece by piece." Chief Yellowfeather nodded. "The old stories speak of spirit warriors who could walk between worlds, taking different shapes as needed. My people knew them as skinwalkers, but every culture has their own name for those who guard the boundaries." A low growl from Jimmy drew their attention. 2 more dogs emerged from the tree line, a graying husky and a battle-scarred wolf dog. The final guardians had arrived. 16, Thomas counted. "The circle's complete." Harold felt the pendant grow warm as the new arrivals took their positions. In their eyes, he saw the faces of their last missing comrades, Davis and Rodriguez, the unit's scouts. "But why now?" Sarah asked. "Why gather everyone after 50 years? Chief Yellowfeather pointed to the scroll. "The barriers weaken in cycles. The old guardians knew this war would come again, so they prepared. Chose warriors from each generation, transformed them, waited for the moment when past and present could unite." The 16 dogs began to move in unison, their paws tracing lines of power across the hidden pattern. The veterans watched with growing understanding, memories of their own encounters with the supernatural during service surfacing like bubbles in deep water. "We all felt it, didn't we?" Colonel Walker said softly. "Those moments in combat when something more than human was watching our backs. Times when survival seemed impossible, but help came from nowhere. The Guardians were always there," Harold realized, "testing us, preparing us. Every war, every conflict, they were recruiting for this moment." The ground trembled slightly, and the stone markers began to hum with energy. Sarah consulted the scroll again, her eyes wide. "According to this, we're standing on a node point. A place where the barrier between worlds is anchored. There are others like it, forming a web around the planet, but they're failing, and what they hold back is getting stronger. The 16 Guardians completed their pattern, forming a perfect circle around the group. In the darkness beyond, they could hear vehicles approaching. The government teams had found them again, but this time, Harold wasn't worried. They had the full circle of Guardians, the knowledge from the scroll, and most importantly, they had allies who understood what they were facing. The real work was about to begin. He touched the pendant, feeling power pulse through the sacred ground beneath his feet. Time to learn some new formations, gentlemen. Colonel Walker pulled a weathered envelope from his jacket, edges brown with old blood, paper creased from decades of careful folding and unfolding. "This came from your captain," he said, handing it to Harold. "Found its way to me after the war. Been waiting for the right moment to pass it on." The 16 Guardians drew closer as Harold opened the letter, their eyes reflecting the ethereal light still pulsing from the ground. The pendant warmed against his chest as he began to read. "To whoever finds this, the mission was real. Everything the Temple Keeper told us was true. The darkness beneath is ancient, patient, and very much alive. We thought we were fighting a war for territory, but we were actually fighting for reality itself." Sarah steadied her father's trembling hands as memories crashed over him like waves. The Temple Keeper's warnings, the ritual, the price they'd agreed to pay. "The letter's in Captain Richard's hand," Thomas confirmed. "But these symbols along the margin, they're like the ones from the scroll." The bloodstains on the paper began to move, forming patterns that matched the glowing paw prints surrounding them. Chief Yellowfeather watched with knowing eyes. "Blood carries memory," he said softly. "Your captain wrote this as he was transforming, becoming one of the first Guardians. His sacrifice sealed the promise in both worlds." Harold continued reading. "The Temple Keeper showed us what would happen if the barriers fell. Cities drowning in shadow, reality tearing apart at the seams, an invasion from spaces between spaces. We made a choice that night. 16 men volunteering for a war beyond wars." The words triggered a flood of clear memory. Harold saw it all. Captain Richards, leading them in the ancient words, each man standing at a point of power within the temple. The keeper presenting them with pendants, explaining that some would have to change first, becoming guardians to guide the others when the time came. "Your captain was the first to transform," Colonel Walker explained. "Wrote this as the change. Took him. Each generation since, we've had our own guardians, our own temples, our own battles in the dark. But this is different. This is the final circle forming." More vehicles could be heard approaching through the woods. Sarah checked her phone. Reports coming in from around the world. Tremors at military bases. Strange lights at ancient sites. Dogs gathering in formation everywhere. The letter's final paragraphs glowed with supernatural light. "To those who complete the circle, you'll know when the time comes. The Guardians will find you, guide you, prepare you for the last transformation. The world needs soldiers who can fight on both sides of the veil. The price is high, but the alternative is unthinkable." Harold felt the truth settling into his bones. This was why the Guardians had waited until he and Thomas were older, near the end of their natural lives. The final transformation would require a willing surrender, a soldier's last sacrifice. "Does this mean—" Sarah's voice cracked. "Dad, will you change?" Harold smiled, watching the Guardian that had been Jimmy Chen pace the sacred circle. "I think part of me has been changing ever since that night in the temple. We all have." The 16 dogs moved into a new formation, their bodies casting shadows that looked like standing soldiers. The approaching vehicles were closer now, headlights cutting through the trees. Thomas straightened his back, years of pain falling away as power flowed through the sacred ground. "Well, old friend, ready for one last deployment?" Harold folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket alongside his own dog tags. The pendant pulsed with the rhythm of his heart, calling him to his place in the circle. He saw fear in his daughter's eyes, but also understanding. "Dad," she began. "I'll still be here," he promised. "Just different. Someone has to guard the barriers. Someone has to remember why we fight." The dogs, his old comrades, his eternal brothers in arms, waited patiently as Harold and Thomas took their positions. The transformation wouldn't be quick or easy, but then, nothing worth fighting forever was. "Besides," Harold said, feeling the change beginning deep in his soul, "your mother always did say I was an old dog who couldn't learn new tricks. Time to prove her wrong." The transformation hit Harold like a fever, burning through his aged body with supernatural intensity. He fell to his knees on the sacred ground, Thomas collapsing beside him. The 16 guardians maintained their circle, their forms flickering, between dog and soldier with increasing speed. Sarah rushed forward, but Colonel Walker held her back. "They have to face this alone," he said. "First trial of the change." From his jacket, Chief Yellow Feather produced an obsidian knife, its blade etched with familiar symbols. This was used in the original ceremony. Each guardian carried one, used it to cut the bonds between flesh and spirit. The blade caught. The light from the glowing paw prints, reflecting images of soldiers becoming wolves, hawks, bears, ancient warriors taking new forms to fight ancient wars. Harold's pendant blazed in response, forcing more memories to the surface. "The knife!" He gasped through waves of pain. "Captain Richards had one. Said we'd need it when the time came." Thomas reached out with trembling hands as Chief Yellow Feather presented the blade. The moment his fingers touched the handle, both men's dog tags began to shine with brilliant light. The ceremonial knife pulsed in sync with their tags and Harold's pendant, forming a triangle of power. "Remember," Colonel Walker instructed, "you're not just changing shape. You're becoming something that walks between worlds. The pain is your humanity fighting to hold on." Sarah watched helplessly as her father struggled with the transformation. The guardians began to howl, not the sound of dogs, but the battle cry of soldiers preparing for war. The sound echoed through dimensions, calling to something deep within Harold and Thomas. "Dad," Sarah called out, "let me help. Stand fast." "Girl," Harold managed through clenched teeth, "this is what we trained for, what we lived for." The knife floated between them, suspended by supernatural forces. Images flashed through Harold's mind, young soldiers becoming guardian spirits, ancient temples holding back the darkness, the eternal war that needed warriors who could fight in any form. Thomas grabbed Harold's hand, their shared pain creating a connection. "Together," he growled, his voice already changing, "like Nam, like always." The ceremonial knife split into 2 perfect copies, one hovering before each man. The guardians tightened their circle, their combined power focusing on the sacred ground beneath the veterans. "The blade removes what binds you to one shape," Chief Yellow Feather explained, "but only if you truly choose to let go." Harold looked at his daughter one last time with human eyes. "I'll always be watching over you," he promised, "just from a different post." Both men grasped their knives. The metal burned cold against their palms, ancient magic racing through their bodies. Around them, reality began to blur as the barrier between worlds grew thin. Government vehicles crashed through the underbrush, agents spilling out with weapons drawn. But they were too late. The transformation had begun, and there was no power on Earth that could stop a soldier from completing his final mission. Harold and Thomas raised their blades, veterans of one last supernatural war. The pain peaked, the light blazed, and the world changed forever. Where 2 old soldiers had stood, 2 new guardians now rose. Harold's form, a powerful silverback German shepherd. Thomas transformed into a sturdy Chesapeake Bay retriever. Their human clothes lay empty on the ground, dog tags gleaming. Among the folds, Sarah stared in wonder as her father tested his new body, moving with a strength and grace he hadn't possessed in decades. The other guardians approached, touching noses in greeting, welcoming their brothers to the pack. Colonel Walker pulled out a bronze compass, its face marked with otherworldly symbols. "This shows the way between worlds," he explained to Sarah. "Your father and Thomas, they're not just dogs now. They're anchors keeping the barriers strong through their very existence." The compass needle spun wildly before settling on Harold. As he stepped toward it, Sarah saw his form flicker. Dog, soldier, something in between, as if he existed in multiple realities at once. "The circle requires 18 points of power," Chief Yellowfeather said, studying the compass. 16 guardians, plus 2 anchors who remember both forms. The knowledge of what you were strengthens what you've become. Harold's new voice filled their minds, retaining his familiar gruff tone. "We can speak this way now, see things we couldn't before. The barriers between worlds, they're like fabric, wearing thin in places." Thomas's thoughts joined in. "And there are others, watching from the spaces between, the things we were meant to hold back. The government agents had formed a perimeter around the sacred ground, but they seemed unable to cross the circle of glowing paw prints. Their weapons passed through the barrier as if it were smoke. They can't touch us here," Colonel Walker explained. "This is ancient ground, protected by powers older than nations. But we can't stay forever. The ritual needs to be completed at the source." Sarah consulted the scroll, which now revealed new text to her enhanced perception. "The temple in Vietnam. It's the keystone. All the other sites draw power from it, but according to this, the original seal is almost gone." The 16 guardians moved in complex patterns, training Harold and Thomas in their new forms. Each movement was both a military drill and a supernatural ritual, preparing them for combat in multiple dimensions. "We'll need to coordinate with the other sites," Harold projected, his thoughts tinged with strategic planning. "How many circles are there?" 9 active worldwide, Colonel Walker replied, each protecting a different aspect of reality. "Yours was meant to guard against the space between spaces, where the old ones wait to return." The compass spun again, pointing to locations around the globe where other guardians were gathering. Sarah watched as her father learned to shift between forms, not fully human anymore, but not entirely canine either. A warrior adapted to fight on any battlefield. Thomas practiced moving through the barrier, his form blurring as he stepped between dimensions. "It's like walking through mist," he shared. "We can see both sides now. Fight on either one." The other guardians demonstrated more advanced techniques, passing through solid objects, sensing approaching threats through supernatural awareness, channeling energy through the ancient geometries beneath their paws. Chief Yellowfeather pointed to the compass's shifting symbols. "The barriers are weakening faster now. We have days at most before the seals fail completely." Harold turned to Sarah, his eyes holding the same determination she'd always known, even in his new form. "You don't have to come with us," he projected gently. "Try and stop me," she replied, gripping the scroll. "Someone needs to read the instructions, right?" The sound of helicopters grew in the distance. Colonel Walker checked the compass again. "Time to move. The ancient roads between sites are still open, if you know how to find them." The 18 warriors gathered their artifacts: compass, scroll, knives, and tags. Sarah felt reality bend around them as the guardians prepared to walk the hidden paths. Harold touched his nose to her hand one last time, his thoughts warm with pride and love. "Ready for a real adventure, kid?" The circle of power began to spin, opening a door between worlds. As the helicopters appeared overhead, 18 guardians and their human allies stepped into the spaces between spaces, beginning their journey to the heart of an ancient war. The ancient road deposited them in a rain-soaked valley in Vietnam, 50 miles northwest of Da Nang. The landscape had changed in half a century, but Harold recognized it instantly. The same karst formations, the same thick jungle, now hiding different secrets. Sarah stumbled as they materialized, steadied by her father's solid form. The 18 guardians spread out in a defensive formation that worked in both physical and supernatural space. Above them, a temple's broken spires pierced the mist like ancient spears. From his pack, Chief Yellowfeather pulled out a bamboo spirit drum, its surface carved with protective symbols. This was used in the original ceremony, he said. Each beat marks the boundary between worlds. The moment the drum's first note sounded, reality shifted. The jungle around them flickered between past and present. Modern trees overlaid with memory, shadowy figures moving through the undergrowth. For Harold and Thomas, every step awakened echoes of their last mission here. The night it happened, Thomas projected, his thoughts heavy with remembrance. We were positioned just like this, 16 men in a circle, facing outward, waiting. For Charlie, Harold added, then corrected himself. No, waiting for something else, something that used the war as cover. The drum's rhythm continued, and Sarah saw the scene playing out like a ghostly film. Young soldiers standing where the guardians now moved, ancient powers awakening beneath the temple stones. In the shadows between trees, darker shapes began to stir. They're still here, Colonel Walker warned, the compass spinning wildly in his hands. The things we were meant to guard against. They've been waiting, growing stronger as the barriers weaken. The Guardian's forms shifted continuously now, adapting to meet threats in multiple dimensions. Harold felt power flowing through his transformed body, military training merging with supernatural instinct. Remember what the Temple Keeper told us? Thomas projected as shadows curled around their paws. About the spaces between spaces. Sarah unrolled the scroll, its text glowing in the gloom. It says here that reality is like a fabric with spaces between the threads. The old ones live in those gaps, watching, waiting for the weave to loosen. A sound cut through the jungle. Not quite physical, not quite supernatural. The drum's rhythm faltered as shadows took more solid form, gathering into shapes that hurt the mind to witness. They remember us, Harold growled, his form flickering between dog and soldier as combat instincts kicked in. Remember how close. They came to breaking through that night. The other guardians moved closer, their combined presence strengthening the barrier between worlds. But the shadows pressed in, testing, probing for weakness. They remembered too, remembered how 16 soldiers had trapped them here 50 years ago. The drum! Chief Yellowfeather called out, his hands moving faster across the ancient instrument. It needs to be reinforced with power from both sides. Harold understood suddenly. In one reality, they were guardian spirits maintaining an ancient seal. In another, they were still soldiers, fighting a war that had never really ended. They needed to be both to win. Sarah, he projected urgently, read from the scroll, the original binding words. We'll match it with what we remember. As Sarah's voice rose in the ancient language, 18 guardians added their own memories. The Temple Keeper's instructions, the sacred oaths, the price they'd agreed to pay. Past and present merged in the drum's rhythm, strengthening the barrier. The shadows recoiled, but didn't retreat. They'd grown too strong over the decades, fed by humanity's conflicts, by the weakening of old ways. This was just the first skirmish in a longer war. We need to reach the temple, Colonel Walker said, watching the compass stabilize, complete the circle where it first formed. But these shadows, they know what we're trying to do. Harold looked at his daughter, seeing her mother's determination in her stance. Saw Thomas, his oldest friend, standing strong in his new form. Saw 18 guardians ready to fight in any reality. Then we give them what we do best, he projected, his supernatural voice carrying the weight of command. A fighting withdrawal, by the numbers, just like old times. The drum's rhythm shifted to a battle cadence as the Guardians began their strategic retreat. They had the tools, the knowledge, and most importantly, the unshakable bond of soldiers who'd faced impossible odds together. The shadows followed, but cautiously now. They remembered what these warriors were capable of, remembered why they'd been chosen as guardians in the first place. The temple waited above, its ancient stones humming with power. One way or another, the long war would end here. The climb to the temple tested them in every reality. In one dimension, they fought through supernatural shadows. In another, they navigated crumbling stairs slick with monsoon rain. Sarah clutched a container of sacred earth, soil from the exact spot where the original circle had been formed, gathered by the Guardians over 50 years of patient watching. The earth remembers, Chief Yellowfeather explained as they ascended. It holds the power of the first binding, the original promises made. Harold took point, his enhanced senses stretching across multiple planes of existence. Behind him, Thomas guarded their rear, his form shifting between realities as needed. The other Guardians moved in practiced formations, adapting military precision to supernatural warfare. Movement, Harold projected, freezing in place. 3 o'clock, Shadow Realm. Through the barrier between worlds, they could see government. Forces ascending the opposite side of the Temple Mount. But they weren't alone. Shapes moved within their shadows, riding them like dark horses, steering them toward the sacred site. "They're being influenced," Colonel Walker observed, the compass spinning in his hands. "The old ones are using them, just like they used the war 50 years ago." Sarah consulted the scroll as they took cover beneath an ancient archway. The text mentions this. How they manipulate human conflict, feed on it, use it to weaken the barriers. The sacred earth in its container pulsed with power, responding to the proximity of its original resting place. Each Guardian carried a portion, their dog tags suspended in the soil, connecting past and present. "Remember the first time we climbed these steps?" Thomas projected to Harold, his thoughts tinged with both nostalgia and urgency. "Young, dumb, thinking we were just humoring the locals. Now look at us," Harold replied, his supernatural form shifting smoothly between dog and soldier. "Old, smart, and running out of time." The drum's rhythm changed as Chief Yellowfeather sensed approaching danger. Shadow creatures circled above, their forms barely visible against the stormy sky. The government teams below had split into tactical units, unknowingly following patterns that served otherworldly purposes. "We need to reach the central chamber," Sarah said, studying the scroll, "where the original circle was formed. But these coordinates, they don't match any physical part of the temple." "Because it exists in both worlds," Colonel Walker explained. "The physical temple is just an anchor for the real structure, the one that exists in the spaces between." The Guardians moved higher, using their unique ability to step between realities to avoid both human and supernatural threats. Each level of the temple brought new challenges, new memories, new understanding of what they'd been prepared for all these years. Harold felt the changes deepening in him with every step. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was a complete adaptation to a new kind of warfare. He could smell approaching shadows, hear the whispers of ancient powers, see the lines, a force that held reality together. A burst of gunfire below sent them scrambling for cover, but Sarah noticed something odd. The bullets. They're passing through the shadows, as if the human forces are shooting at what they can almost see. Thomas completed. "The barriers are getting thinner. Soon, they'll fail completely." The sacred earth grew warmer, more active. They were getting close to its original resting place, the spot where 16 young soldiers had first sworn their eternal oaths, where 8 had transformed immediately, becoming the first Guardians, while 8 remained human, preserved to complete the circle when the time was right. "One last push," Harold projected to the team, "just like old times but with new rules." The 18 Guardians gathered their strength, preparing for the final ascent. Above them, the temple's highest spire pierced multiple realities, marking the way to a threshold that existed in all of them. Sarah held the scroll ready, her father's new form solid beside her. They had the sacred earth, the ancient knowledge, and warriors who could fight in any realm. Now they just had to reach the heart of it all before the barriers collapsed completely. The shadows gathered, the storm intensified, and 18 Guardians began their final approach to a battlefield that existed between all worlds. At the temple's highest level, reality fractured like a broken mirror. Each shard showed a different version of the same space. The ancient stones as they were now, as they had been 50 years ago, as they had existed for centuries before. And at the center stood a weathered warrior's staff, its surface carved with symbols that matched both the scroll and Harold's pendant. The commander's staff, Colonel Walker breathed. The temple keeper used it to direct the original ritual. We thought it was lost when half of us changed, Thomas projected, his form flickering between dog and soldier more rapidly now. But it was waiting, like everything else. Sarah approached the staff carefully, the scroll glowing in her hands. As she got closer, new text appeared on the ancient parchment, revealing itself only in the presence of the sacred object. "The ritual requires perfect balance," she read, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. 8 who changed then, 8 who change now, and 2 who remember both states. The staff channels power from all 18 points. Harold moved to the center of the space, feeling energy pulse through his transformed body. The other guardians took positions around him, their movements precise and practiced, as if they'd been rehearsing this moment for 50 years. "We're not just sealing the barriers," Chief Yellowfeather said, setting up his spirit drum. "We're becoming them. The guardians don't just protect the boundaries, they are the boundaries." The staff began to hum as Sarah continued reading. "Each guardian must find their true voice, not dog, not human, but something that speaks to both worlds. The power flows through understanding, through the wisdom of both forms." Harold concentrated, feeling his way through the transformation. His body shifted, becoming something new, a form that existed in multiple realities at once. Around him, the other guardians did the same, their shapes blurring as they found their own balance points. Thomas's thoughts reached out stronger now. It's like learning a new language, not just speaking it, but thinking in it. The staff's humming grew louder, harmonizing with the spirit drum. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw her father and the others achieving form she could barely comprehend. Beings that could move through any reality, warriors, adapted to an eternal watch. But shadows gathered in the spaces between spaces, pressing against the thinning barriers. The old ones remembered this ritual, remembered how it had bound them before. They wouldn't allow it to happen again without a fight. "Time's running out," Colonel Walker warned, the compass spinning wildly in his hands. "The final transformation has to happen before the barriers fail completely." Harold felt power building in his new form, military discipline merging with supernatural awareness. He could sense the weak points in reality now, see where the old ones pushed hardest against the failing seals. "Sarah," he projected, his thoughts clear despite the chaos around them, "you need to lead the ritual. You have the scroll, you know our hearts. Guide us through." She gripped the staff, feeling ancient power flow through it. "But I'm not one of you. I'm not a guardian. You're a bridge," Chief Yellowfeather said, "between what they were and what they're becoming. Sometimes the most important part of a ritual is the one who remembers it." The shadows pressed closer as Sarah raised the staff, the scroll's words burning bright before her. Around her, 18 guardians stood ready to complete a transformation 50 years in the making. The war that had started in Vietnam had never really ended. It had just been waiting for its warriors to evolve into something that could fight it properly. Now, in a temple that existed in all realities, they would finally become what they were always meant to be. Sarah looked at her father's shifting form, seeing in him both the soldier he had been and the guardian he was becoming. The staff pulsed. In her hands, ready to channel ancient power through modern warriors. The time for preparation was over. The final transformation was about to begin. The Temple Keeper's crystal prism hung suspended in the air between Sarah and the 18 guardians, splitting reality into visible layers. Through its facets, they could see the multiple dimensions they would have to defend, each one vital, each one under attack. "Government forces have reached the lower levels," Colonel Walker reported, the compass needle spinning erratically. And something's riding their shadows, pushing them up faster than they should be able to move. The old ones are getting desperate, Thomas projected, his form now a fluid blend of canine and human aspects. They can feel the ritual building. Through the prism, Sarah watched shadows coalesce into nightmare shapes, testing the weakening barriers. The crystal refracted their true forms, ancient, patient beings that had waited eons for reality's defenses to fail. Harold's voice cut through the chaos, still carrying the authority of a master sergeant, even in its supernatural form. Status. Report. Everyone sound off. One by one, the Guardians reported their condition. The 8 who had transformed 50 years ago were strong, their powers at full capacity. The 8 who had just changed, including Harold and Thomas, were still adapting, learning to exist in multiple realities at once. The final transformation requires perfect synchronization. Sarah read from the scroll, the prism casting rainbow, patterns across the ancient text. All 18 must achieve harmony between their forms at the exact same moment. Chief Yellowfeather's spirit drum took on a new rhythm, matching the pulse of power flowing through the temple. The prism shows the way, he said. Each facet reveals a different aspect of what you must become. The crystal began to rotate, showing them visions. A dog's loyalty merged with a soldier's discipline, ancient magic flowing through modern warriors. The perfect balance between physical and spiritual power. But doubt crept in as the shadows pressed closer. We're too old, one of the newly transformed Guardians projected, too set in our ways to change completely. No, Harold responded, his form stabilizing as he found his center. We're exactly what we need to be. Age brought us wisdom, experience taught us patience. We've lived long enough to understand both sides of the barrier. Sarah held the commander's staff higher as the prism revealed more truths. The text speaks of this, how the Guardians must have the wisdom of years combined with the strength of spirit. You weren't meant to change back then. You needed time to grow into this power. The crystal spun faster, its light touching each Guardian in turn. Where it fell, their forms became clearer, more defined, not as dogs or men, but as something that could walk between all worlds. Thomas's thoughts reached out to his old friend. Remember what the Temple Keeper said? About how some battles can only be won by those who've learned the true cost of fighting. The prism flared, showing them the price of victory. To become permanent Guardians, to seal the barriers forever, they would have to leave their human lives behind completely. No going back, no peaceful retirement, an eternal watch in forms that straddled all realities. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as she understood what her father's transformation truly meant. Dad, it's all right, kid, Harold projected, his supernatural voice warm with love. This is what we were saved for, why we lived when so many others didn't. The war never ended. It just needed soldiers who could fight it on every level. The crystal's light intensified as the 18 Guardians moved into their final formation. Through its facets, they could see the enemy gathering strength, shadow creatures massing in the spaces between spaces, using human soldiers as unwitting pawns in their ancient game. "They're coming," Colonel Walker warned, the compass whirling madly from all sides, all realities. The prism showed them one last truth. The moment the ritual began, the old ones would throw everything they had at the temple. The Guardians would have to hold multiple lines, in multiple dimensions, while completing their transformation. Sarah gripped the staff tighter, the scroll's words burning in her mind. She had memorized the ritual, understood what needed to be done. Now she just had to hold it together long enough for 18 warriors to complete their final evolution. The crystal spun one last time, its light settling into a steady glow. The storm was about to break, and reality itself hung in the balance. The first attack came from everywhere at once. Shadow creatures poured through weakening barriers, while government forces breached the lower temple. Chief Yellowfeather pulled an ancient mask from his pack, carved wood darkened by centuries, inlaid with shells that gleamed with otherworldly light. The spirit mask shows enemies in their true form, he said, passing it to Sarah. You need to see what we're really fighting. Through the mask's eye holes, Sarah watched reality split apart. The approaching soldiers weren't just men with guns, they were unwitting vessels, their shadows elongated into impossible shapes, puppet strings of darkness pulling at their limbs. They don't know they're being used, Harold projected, his guardian form shifting to meet threats in multiple dimensions, just like we didn't know what we were really fighting in '69. The 18 Guardians moved with fluid grace, adapting military tactics to supernatural warfare, where human soldiers saw only dogs. The mask revealed warrior spirits wielding powers drawn from both worlds. Thomas led one flank, his form blazing with inner light as he pushed back the shadow creatures. Sarah, Colonel Walker called out, the compass spinning in his hands. The ritual has to start now. We'll hold them off. She raised the commanders. Staff, the scroll's words burning in her memory. Through the spirit mask, she watched her father take point position, leading the defense in every reality at once. The other Guardians formed a perfect circle, their transformed bodies holding ground in multiple dimensions. The shadow creatures struck first, trying to break their formation. But 50 years of preparation had made the Guardians ready. They fought with impossible precision. Teeth and claws in one reality, spectral weapons in another, pure force of will in the spaces between. Just like Nam, Thomas projected to Harold as they repelled another wave. Except this time we can see the real enemy. The spirit mask showed Sarah everything. Shadow tendrils trying to corrupt the sacred ground, government agents fighting their own possessed shadows, ancient evils testing the Guardians' new defenses. Her father and his companions moved like living light, pushing back the darkness on every level of existence. The mask, Chief Yellowfeather shouted over the chaos. It's not just for seeing, it's part of the ritual. It helps focus the transformation, Sarah understood. Through the mask, she could direct the staff's power, helping the Guardians find their perfect forms. Each warrior glowed brighter as they settled into their true nature. Not just dogs, not just soldiers, but eternal sentinels existing in all realities at once. The shadow creatures screamed in frequencies that shattered dimensional barriers. The government forces fell back, their weapons useless against enemies they couldn't fully see. But the Guardians held their ground, drawing strength from the sacred earth beneath their feet. Now, Sarah, Harold projected as another wave of darkness approached. Complete the circle. Finish what we started 50 years ago. She raised the staff higher, its power flowing through the spirit mask, illuminating the 18 points of light that would seal reality's failing barriers. Through the mask's enchanted lens, she saw her father one last time as she remembered him. The brave soldier, the loving parent, before he transformed completely into something gloriously new. The battle raged across dimensions as Sarah began the final phase of the ritual, her voice carrying ancient words into modern war. The Guardians fought with everything they had, holding the line between worlds while their ultimate transformation began. Reality itself hung in the balance as shadow met light, as past met present, as human merged with spirit. And in the center of it all, 18 warriors prepared to become what they were always meant to be, the eternal guardians of the spaces between spaces. From the heart of the temple emerged a golden key, rising from the sacred earth as if called by the Guardian's transformation. It hung suspended in the air, turning slowly, each rotation revealing different aspects of reality, past, present, and the spaces between. The final key, Colonel Walker breathed, the compass in his hands pointing directly at it. The temple keeper said it would appear when the circle was ready. Sarah held both staff and mask, watching through enchanted eyes as the key began to glow. The scroll's final passages revealed themselves, burning with supernatural light. Only when 18 become one, when past and present merge, can the key turn in the lock between worlds. The shadow creatures sensed the key's power, throwing themselves at the Guardians' defenses with renewed fury. Reality buckled under their assault as they tried to prevent the ritual's completion. "Hold the line," Harold projected, his transformed, body blazing with inner fire. "Everything we've lived for comes down to this moment." The 18 Guardians moved in perfect synchronization, their forms now fluid between all dimensions. Thomas led one flank, pushing back waves of darkness with powers drawn from both human courage and spiritual strength. The other Guardians fought across multiple realities at once, their sacrifice of human form giving them mastery over the spaces between. "Sarah," Chief Yellowfeather called out as he maintained the spirit drum's rhythm. "The key responds to the living. The Guardians can't touch it. It has to be you." She understood instantly. The 18 had to maintain their circle, had to keep reality from tearing apart. Only she could complete the ritual, could turn the key that would seal the barriers. Forever. The golden key pulsed in sync with her heartbeat as she stepped forward. Through the spirit mask, she saw the lock it was meant for. Not a physical thing, but a tear in the fabric of existence, a wound in reality that had been bleeding power for centuries. "Dad," she whispered, watching her father's guardian form. "Hold back another wave of shadow creatures. I'm scared." Harold's thoughts reached her, warm with pride and love. "You've got this, kid. You're stronger than any of us. You can see both sides clearly. That's why you're here." The key grew warmer as she grasped it, showing her visions of what would happen if they failed. Reality unraveling, the old ones returning, darkness flooding through the spaces between spaces. But it also showed her the solution. 18 points of light forming a perfect circle, powered by warriors who understood both human courage and spiritual power. The ritual must be completed in all realities at once. She read from the scroll's final passage. The key turns not just in space, but in time, sealing past and present together. The shadow creatures made their final push, understanding what was about to happen. Government forces on the lower levels fell back in confusion as their shadows turned against them completely. Reality itself groaned under the strain of multiple dimensions pulling apart. But the Guardians held firm. 50 years of preparation had led to this moment. 8 who had changed then, 8 who had changed now, and 2 who bound past and present together, the perfect circle prophesied by the Temple Keeper. Sarah raised the key toward the dimensional tier, feeling power flow through her from the sacred ground, from the spirit mask, from the 18 points of light that had once been soldiers and were now something more. "Remember," Thomas projected to them all, "what the Temple Keeper said about bridges between worlds." Harold's thoughts joined in. Some have to guard the barriers, some have to remember why they exist, and some have to close the door. Sarah finished, understanding at last why she had been led here. The key began to turn, reality bending around it as 18 Guardians poured their power into the final seal. The shadow creatures howled in frequencies that shattered dimensional barriers. The government forces retreated, their human minds unable to process what they were witnessing. And in the heart of an ancient temple, a daughter helped her father and his companions complete a transformation. 50 years in the making. The key turned, the circle closed, and reality itself began to change. As the golden key completed its final turn, a silver bell materialized in the temple's heart, ancient, untarnished, its surface etched with symbols of completion. Its clear tone rang out across all realities, marking the moment when everything changed. The shadow creatures withdrew, pulled back into their eternal prison by forces they could no longer resist. The government forces below found themselves alone with ordinary shadows, their memories of supernatural warfare already fading like a half-remembered dream. Sarah lowered the commander's staff, watching through the spirit mask, as her father and his companions completed their transformation. The 18 Guardians now existed in a state between all states, neither fully dog nor human, but eternal sentinels capable of walking any realm required to maintain the barriers. The cycle is complete, Chief Yellowfeather said softly, the spirit drum quiet in his hands. What was broken 50 years ago has been mended. Through the mask, Sarah saw the full beauty of what they had become. Each guardian glowed with inner light, their forms shifting smoothly between realities, as needed. In one dimension they appeared as noble dogs, in another as proud soldiers, and in the spaces between they were something magnificently unique. "It's time," Harold projected, his thoughts clear and strong despite his transformed state. He padded forward, his guardian form radiating power and purpose. The barriers need constant watching now. Colonel Walker checked the compass one last time. The lines are stabilizing. The old ones can't break through anymore. But eternal vigilance is the price of peace, Thomas completed, moving to Harold's side. We knew what we were signing up for, old friend. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as she understood the full scope of their sacrifice. These 18 warriors would never truly return to the human world. They would exist forever in the spaces between, guarding reality itself. From ancient threats, the silver bell chimed again, and this time Sarah saw the paths opening. Sacred roads between temples, between dimensions, between all the places that needed protection. The guardians would walk these paths forever, maintaining the seals there sacrifice had created. "Dad," she whispered, reaching out to touch Harold's transformed shape one last time. "I'll never see you again, will I?" His thoughts wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Not like before, but whenever you see a dog standing watch, whenever you feel safer without knowing why, that's us. That's all of us keeping our eternal promise. Chief Yellowfeather handed her the spirit mask. "Keep it. There should always be someone who remembers, someone who can see the truth when needed." The guardians formed up, preparing to begin their eternal patrol. Each one touched Sarah gently in passing, nose to hand, thought to heart, a final goodbye to the human world they were leaving behind. "The bell will ring when you're needed," Thomas projected to her. "When the barriers need maintenance or when new threats emerge, we'll be listening." "And watching," Harold added, his supernatural form strong and sure. "Always watching." Sarah stood in the temple's heart, holding the mask and bell as 18 points of light began to fade into the spaces between spaces. The last thing she saw was her father's guardian form, proud and powerful, leading his eternal patrol into realms she could barely imagine. The silver bell chimed one final time, its tone carrying both ending and beginning. Sarah smiled through her tears, knowing that somewhere between reality's threads, 18 warriors were standing guard, not as the young soldiers they had been, or the old men they had become, but as something greater, eternal guardians born from courage, sacrifice, and the unwavering loyalty of dogs. She turned to leave the temple, the mask secure in her hands, the bell's promise in her heart. The world would never know how close it had come to unraveling, or how 18 veterans had transformed themselves to save it. But sometimes, on quiet nights, those who knew where to look might catch a glimpse of noble dogs walking between shadows, keeping their eternal watch over the spaces between spaces. The war that had started in Vietnam had finally found its true veterans, and reality itself was safer for their sacrifice.